My paranormal experiences started when I was a young child. I had a very unusual childhood, mostly because the things that I remember the most clearly were the things that were just odd, I guess. Looking back now, I'm 50 years old now, and half a century of hindsight makes it quite interesting to look at my childhood and see how unusual it really was compared to a lot of other people that I've met over the years. The main paranormal experience that kind of was the catalyst that I remember was my experience having a face-to-face encounter with a Sasquatch. And I won't go into that story, but that event, which I shared on Dogman Encounters Radio episode 29 years ago, that seemed to be a catalyst for me of having lots of other experiences. And I don't know if it was the reason for how my life has gone since then, or that I had that encounter with the Sasquatch because of my abilities that I have. And I'll get into that a little bit here in a moment. My grandmother was apparently, from what my mother told me, I didn't really remember my grandmother very much. She died when I was 7. The stories my mom told me about my grandma, that she was extraordinarily psychic. Amazing stories that she would tell me about the precognition that she would have. She would know when people were coming, when events were going to happen. And she was very devout Christian, and she didn't like the paranormal experiences that she had one bit. She really struggled against it and did not like having these experiences. But my mom told me when I was a child, or when I was younger, she believed that a lot of the things, the gifts that my grandmother had, seemed to pass to me for whatever reasons. It's hard for me to judge that because it's been my life and my experiences, and I can definitely say that I've had many different kinds of psychic and paranormal phenomena occur in my life, but I'm kind of biased because it's my own life. So that's kind of the background to where things started for me as a child. And after I had that experience with the Sasquatch, that was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying experience. And it really forced me to look at the strange things that happened to me as a child. And one of the things my mother told me when dealing with all the nightmares I had from this experience of my face-to-face encounter with the Sasquatch, she told me that sometimes the best things to do in life is to face your fears. And that's kind of what propelled me to not push away, I guess, my abilities in a way to embrace them and to not be fearful of the different experiences that I've had, and to begin as a young boy to study paranormal phenomena, to study parapsychology. And there wasn't ghost hunting, and these type of things didn't exist when I was a child. The only thing that existed was parapsychology. There were no ghost hunting groups or paranormal investigation groups when I was a kid. It didn't exist. But I did the best that I could to try to understand what had happened to me and my experiences after that. And I'll start now with try to explain some of the experiences I had as a child. I had a lot. So there were things that stick out to me, events that stuck out to me. And one of the major ones that I remember as a young child, I was 8 years old. We had moved from Chicago where I was born and raised, and moved to Port Clinton, Ohio, a little town in Ohio right on Lake Erie. Started a new school and moved into a quiet little neighborhood with my family. And there's a giant oak tree in the back of the school where I attended. I'm not sure why this happened, but during recess, we'd run outside and run around behind the school after lunch. And there was this giant red oak tree in the back of the school, and it would talk to me. I didn't have any other frame of reference for that. I just thought that it was a normal thing. Looking back now, I've never heard really anybody else have an experience like this. But as a child, I would have these conversations with this tree, and I had to be close to it in order for me to be able to talk kind of like a person. I couldn't have a conversation across the field. I needed to be close, but it happened in my mind. It wasn't a verbal communication. And I remember we became friends. It was comforting that even though I didn't have any friends at the time, I had terrible experiences in school that first year. So I was going through a lot of my own personal trauma with a very bad teacher at the time. And this tree comforted me. When I would go out to recess, I would go sit by this tree and we would have these wonderful conversations. It really touches me in my heart because it was such a devastating time in my life. Being a new kid in school and having a terrible teacher, my whole world was kind of thrown upside down during that time. But this tree communicated with me, and I thought it was normal. I thought it was just a thing that everybody could do or experienced. And it wasn't until later on in that year that I started to get a few friends, and I had mentioned about the tree. They would look at me like I was crazy. And, you know, they would talk to other kids, and then it became this big thing that, oh, John talks to trees, and they talk back. I ended up learning real quick that nobody else had that experience. And that was hard. That was hard, to go through that and to be shut down about that from my peers, and even came up in school with the teacher. Yeah, it was a mess. But I learned how to not talk about the tree. The next year, I remember when I got into fourth grade, I remember seeing a person stand in the corner of the classroom. It was an older child, and it was still a child. And I didn't really understand why the child was standing in the corner. It would just appear there. And I would be kind of fascinated by this person standing in the corner. And I would always be distracted by this. And it never said anything to me, but my teacher kind of always got on my case about being distracted. And she pulled me aside one day and asked me, why are you always distracted? It's like, well, the boy standing in the corner. And she's like, what are you talking about? And it was a ghost. Nobody else saw this boy standing in the corner. And it seemed like he wanted to communicate with me. The sense I got from him, he was timid. And he wanted me to come to him and talk. But during the class, it just didn't happen. And when I told the teacher about the boy standing in the corner, that opened up another big can of worms, and I ended up having to get counseling and had to go see a psychiatrist, had to go through a bunch of testing and things. I remember going through all that as a child, and the test came back that I was, I remember the psychologist saying I was normal, but I was just odd. So that kind of just shut everything down for me after that point. anytime I would tell anybody something unusual, had all these repercussions. So I just learned to just shut up about it. I had other things that would happen, and a lot of which is hard to explain, even for myself, because a lot of the ways that I function, it's hard for me to say that I am a psychic. I'm not a professional psychic. I've never wanted to be a professional psychic. Even though I have certain abilities, I've never wanted to pursue that. That's a whole other story, but I just never wanted the recognition, because every time I would bring something up that had anything to do with my experiences, it always ended up turning out bad for me. So I kept a lot of things to myself. A lot of the experiences that I had were feelings that would come to me. In parapsychological terms, it would be considered clairsentience. It's basically the ability to feel things. Just as a clairvoyance is something where people are able to see things on a psychic level, visions and so forth. Clairsentience is a knowing, a feeling things that don't have any basis in logic. They just come. And a lot of these feelings that I've had, lots of times were warnings. I don't understand lots of times as a child having these feelings and not really understanding them. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I studied parapsychology, to try to get a grip on what I was experiencing, what I was feeling. I would have other experiences that I would have clairaudience, where I would hear voices that nobody else would hear. There are times that I'd have visions, and I'll get to some of those here in a minute with some of the major experiences that I've had. I'm just trying to give a background as a child, what I went through and dealing with these things. Part of my journey to understand my experiences was studying parapsychology, watching basically any movie that had anything to do with paranormal or ghosts or monsters or anything like that. I became really into movies, books, anything that had to do with the strange or unusual, just because it was a way for me to kind of face my fears. And that was always kind of the foundation of it, because I was scared a lot of the time. I had terrible nightmares, not just from my experience with the Sasquatch when I was 7. I'd have other nightmares, a lot of which I think had to do with hauntings, and other deceased people would come to me to try to communicate. And lots of times I didn't understand. I didn't really function in the way that I guess other psychics do, where they are able to communicate and be able to help them. But I did do a lot of research in parapsychology, but it did help me to have a framework to which I would be able to communicate with adults what was happening with me. And my mom, thankfully, she was always very open to these things in my life. And I didn't really feel that with my dad growing up. And so I was more open with my mom. And I'll lead into the first major event, a paranormal event that I can look back to as a younger boy. I was 11 years old. My mother had a best friend who lived in St. Louis, Missouri. She was best friends with her since she was in high school. And we made a trip from Ohio to Missouri to spend a week visiting with her and her family. It was myself, my sister, my mom, and another friend of my mom's. So a bunch of women. We went to St. Louis to visit. And this house that we visited, that my mom's friend Linda lived in, was humongous. It was a 3-story mansion. It was built in the early 1800s. It was amazing. It had a huge ballroom, a library, a humongous basement. I remember the neighborhood was something you'd see in Hollywood. The mansions were just incredible. And I remember showing up there and having this terrible feeling of dread of this place. And I was like, oh no, what is going on here? But I didn't let it get to me. I tried to just throw it off. That first night when we got into the mansion and we're talking, my parents or my mom and her friends were talking, and I wanted to explore the mansion. They had this black cat that would roam the mansion, and I was never able to get close enough to pet it. It was very skittish. That detail will come in later. But I would explore this mansion and just had terrible cold spots, and it just made me feel very uncomfortable. I found out soon that I didn't have a whole lot to do there except watch movies, which they had this huge library of movies and VHS tapes went downstairs in the basement. And so that was where I hung out most of the time watching movies. I'll remember them saying that it was so big that they hadn't even explored the entire basement since they moved in. And that always kind of blew my mind. It was dark and dreary, and I was kind of terrified of being down in the basement by myself. But I would see this cat coming and going he would go back into the shadows of the basement and would disappear. And while I was there, I had several things that happened to me, one of which was that first night taking a shower. I went into one of the bathrooms that they had. They had 7 bathrooms in this place. I remember that. And this particular bathroom I went into to take a shower had never been used since they had been there. I had this, for lack of better explanations, this encounter with this ghost. This man had a beard, looked very angry, like I wasn't supposed to be there. And I was in the shower when this face appeared and with me in the shower. It was terrifying. I screamed and ran out of the shower, running out of the shower naked. And thankfully there was nobody else around, but I just remember being terrified and going and sharing my experience with the family who lived there. And they were like, oh yeah, well, there's a long history of things that's happened in this house. The previous owner had died in the house, and he was really big into black magic. When the previous owner had died there, and had taken like a month for someone to finally come around and check up on this person. So he was in the house for a month, decaying as when they found his body. But the house, there were all these mannequins that were set up around the house, and he was a recluse, apparently. So he was active in working, doing rituals, apparently, with black magic. And there was lots of boxes of black candles that were still left in the basement. Remember that? There was definitely some dark energy there. The family were just like, oh, it's just nothing. Like, they said that they didn't have hardly any experiences, and I think that they were lying at the time, but because they didn't want me to be scared. But I remember the next day, everybody wanted to go shopping, and so I didn't want to go with a bunch of women shopping, and I wanted to stay, and everybody else was gone, just have free reign of the house, and just really enjoying being in a mansion by myself as a kid. I remember they had this sunroom that was right off of the kitchen, a beautiful little area. And there was this door that was across from me sitting in the sunroom. When we first showed up and they were giving us the tour of the house, they had shown that this particular door opened up to a stairway going down and ended at a wall. It had no reason why it was there. It was really kind of creepy. Nobody had an explanation for it, why it was there. It had a ton of cobwebs and stuff in there, so nobody ever went in there. But while I was sitting in the sunroom across from me at that door, there was scratching, like the cat was inside there and wanted to get out. So I was like, huh, that's weird that the cat is in there. I got up and I opened the door, and as soon as I opened the door, there was nothing there. But I had this energy come up on top of me, and it was invisible. I didn't see anything, but I felt it, and it tackled me to the floor. The weight of this thing was incredible. I was pinned to the floor and I couldn't move, and I could feel it sucking my energy. I felt like I was dying, and I was absolutely petrified, trying to scream, but I couldn't move. I wasn't asleep. I was awake when this happened. As soon as I could feel it got up off of me, and that pressure released, and I got up and I ran out of the house and ran down to the street. And I refused to go back inside the house till they came back a couple hours later. And I was just very distraught. I never had any experience like that before in my life. And I explained what had happened, and they didn't know what to think. No event happened later, for the rest of the day. So after a good night's rest, the next day, everybody is in the kitchen. The sunroom is right there next to the kitchen. Everybody's right there. And I thought in my mind, I'm going to open that door again because everybody's here. I'm safe. Nothing can happen. So I go over to that door and I open the door, and the same thing happens again. I fall to the ground, and everybody's like, what is going on? What happened to John? And as soon as they came over and touched me, that thing was off of me, and I was able to get up, and I just lost it. I was a mess emotionally after that because I thought I was safe. I felt like I was safe because everybody was there, but it still happened. I just remember just being very confused and very scared after that, and not wanting to be alone for the rest of the time that I was there. And during that time, I would just kind of stay in the basement, watching the movies, because that's always the best way for me just to kind of block everything out until it was time for us to leave. And I remember as we were going, saying to the family that lived there, I don't know why I never brought it up before then, but I said, I wanted to say goodbye to the cat. And they looked at each other and were like, what cat? I'm like the black cat that you guys have that's been walking around the whole week that we've been here. And everybody looked at each other like, well, we don't have a cat. The daughter that they had was definitely allergic to cat. And that just kind of blew my mind that I had been seeing this black cat walking around. Apparently, this, whatever it was that was in the house, I don't really have an explanation for that, but it would walk right through the room with everybody there, and it just seemed like it was so real, but nobody else had seen a black cat. That's just one of the major paranormal events that I remember from that time in my life. The next one I would remember that I can think of that was a major thing for me. I was a freshman in high school. Most of my friends, when I was a freshman, were older, juniors and seniors when I was a freshman, and we partied a lot. I got into the wrong crowd when I was in high school, and did a lot of drinking, did a lot of partying stuff, and the friends I had were kind of bad influences. But one of my friends lived in this farmhouse outside of town. This place was pretty dark. It was a pretty nasty place. I would never like visiting there because some bad juju was all over that property. And we would go and drink there and have bonfires and things like that. And the first time that we had a bonfire there, remember having just really nasty sensations. Recognize real quick that drinking alcohol around negative spirits was not a good idea. And I learned that lesson pretty quick. I remember seeing we had this bonfire set up in the driveway, in the gravel driveway. It was in front of the garage, and the garage door was open, but they didn't keep it up very well. It was a mess, that whole property. And going into that garage, we went in the garage for some reason to get something. And I remember we all sensed it, this coldness. We all felt like there's a presence in that place. I remember having this, for lack of better terms, a demon come and speak to me in my ear. It was saying how it wanted to kill me and that it was going to get into my friends. He was going to use my friends to kill me. It was really disconcerting at the time. Of course, I was intoxicated as well, but I just remember hearing the voice, and I was really upset. And I kind of stood up against it. And my friends didn't know what I was doing, but I was speaking out against it, telling it to leave. And it made these scratches on my arm that drew blood. I immediately showed my friends, I basically howled in pain. My friends asked what had happened, and I didn't have an answer. I didn't really want to tell them I had something speaking to me in my ear. We were all kind of tipsy anyways from drinking. I was just like, look, we need to get out of here. And my friends were all about paranormal stuff. They were like, no way, we're not going anywhere. We're going to figure this out. They were being, in my opinion, very foolish. And I didn't want to have anything. I didn't want to go back into the garage where it happened. And so everybody kind of got into this mood of wanting something to happen to them and challenging the spirit or whatever it was that did that to me to do it to them. And I was like, this isn't good. Come on, guys, this is ridiculous. And then after nothing had happened, I remember we had walked out of the garage and around the back. It's a farmland. So there was a pretty good sized field behind the garage. We saw this mist that was coming over the ground. Like it looked like something out of a horror movie. It didn't make any sense why this was happening. It was only coming across from next to the garage. It was about 2-3 feet off the ground. It was like almost like somebody turned on a fog machine. Like this really thick fog just started coming across the field towards us. And we all kind of just looked at each other in like utter disbelief. And there were about 5 of us, myself and my friends. It looked like it was glowing. Maybe not like a really prominent glowing, like it was really obvious, but it was bright enough that we could see it. It was dark. It was in the middle of winter. It was dark out, and the bonfire was in the front of the garage, so there wasn't really much light back there. But we saw this fog rolling in, and it was starting getting closer and closer to us, and we're like, all right, let's get out of here. And we all got in cars and we took off, even though we were all kind of intoxicated. We still got in the cars and drove away. Of course, I don't have an explanation for that. All of us saw it. Some of my friends were very skeptical that they thought that I had scratched myself, but I just didn't have any way to do it. And I didn't really share things with them too much, because anytime that I did, it would make an opportunity for them to make fun of me. You know how stupid kids are. That was pretty frightening, I would say. It wasn't something that stands out to me that like it was a major event in my life, but it was certainly something that I certainly remember it to this day. And I had several other interesting things that have happened, lots of synchronicities. I know that I need to actually give stories. So I had one time that I remember sitting at home with my mom, my sister, and it was summertime. I remember saying to my mom and to my sister, how boring it was. We lived in such a boring place. Why does it have to be so boring? And right after I said that, we had all these things happen in the neighborhood. A major storm moved in like within an hour after having said that. It blew down a tree next door to us into the neighbor's house. And then the next day had a drunk driver drive up into the porch across the street from our house. So directly across the street from that house that had the tree fall on it, a drunk driver drove into the house across the street. The day after that, there was an escaped convict. I guess he was going to his arraignment or something like that. Something that happened where he escaped, and he ended up going to his mother's house, which is 2 doors down from us. He was a really bad dude. Apparently, he had killed a couple people. He did not want to go to prison. Somehow he escaped and got into that house, and the police had surrounded the house. And I remember my mom was also a law enforcement officer at the time, and I called her up and I was like, all the cops have, are surrounded the house a couple doors down, and we don't know what's going on. And she knew what was happening because she was a law enforcement. She's like, run, lock all the doors right now. And I remember putting the phone down and running to the back door. The moment I locked the door, here's this dude, and he grabs the door handle to open it up to come inside. If I had been a half a second later, he would have come right into the house. Ended up running because he couldn't get into the house. They ended up, the cops chased him down and tackled him and caught him. But it was after that event, it was like 3 days in a row of these things that happened. My mom came home because I told her what had happened. She left work early and came home, and she's like, okay, you got to take it back. You got to take it back. And I was like, okay, I take it back. I want it to be boring. Things like that happened a lot to me. Like I would say things and things would just happen. That's just one example. I know it's not necessarily spooky or overly paranormal, but is one of the things that tended to happen to me in my life. And I would say probably the next major event that I can think of that's worth sharing, I guess, is an event that took place on one of the islands out in Lake Erie. I lived in Port Clinton, Ohio, right on the shore of the lake. We were a popular tourist town in the summertime, and a lot of people would go over to Put-in-Bay, which is a party island, basically. It's a beautiful island on the lake, and there's another little tiny island that's nestled in to Put-in-Bay, and it's called Gibraltar Island. And this place is owned by Ohio State University. It's a laboratory there that they do a lot of biology testing, a lot of water testing. I'm not really 100% sure all the things that they do there, but Ohio State University owns the island and does a lot of work there. At the time, I was 19 years old. I graduated from high school and I was waiting to go into the military. I was working for a cleaning company that was hired by Ohio State University to go to this island and to do cleanup work on several of the homes there. They weren't homes anymore. They were places where faculty would stay when they would go to the island and do work. There were about a half a dozen houses there, including a very large mansion, which is actually considered a castle. It's called Cook Castle, and you can look this up. It's a beautiful place, a beautiful island. It was made, I believe, in the 1800s. I won't go into the story behind why it was built and all that, but it's a historic monument to Put-in-Bay and the area. We were tasked to go in to clean these homes and to actually go into the castle and clean it up. these places were a mess. Wasn't sure exactly why it was in the state that it was in, but it just needed a good thorough cleansing. And I think they were getting ready to do painting and things like that. And this was in the fall. It was in September, October of 1991. We were brought out to the island, and we got all set up to start doing the cleaning on all these different places, these different homes. While we were there, the faculty would, tell us about the history of the island, and they would come and visit and talk to us and things like that. And they came right out and said, the place is haunted. And of course, everybody was joking around like, "Ooh, it's haunted." Oh, of course. And like the castle's got to be haunted too, right? So the people who were there, they had stories of, they knew that we were not taking, a lot of the people in the cleaning company that were there, they didn't take it serious, of course. But the people, I remember sharing the stories, they didn't think it was a joke. They were serious about it. They didn't like going into the castle. Apparently, people have had bad experiences in the castle. Apparently, of all the areas in the castle, the third floor was apparently the most haunted. And of course, everybody's excited about it and making fun and stuff like that. And we went about our business and started the cleaning and things. And we did start in the castle. And it was a bunch of us. There was at least a dozen people doing this work. I remember definitely sensing something. Like it was quite obvious to me that there was activity there in that place. I didn't really talk a lot about it. My sister was there. She was dating my boss at the time. And I think sometimes shared things with her. I was kind of friends with my boss, so I would share some things with him as well. But it was just mostly just business, But I remember being on the first floor, working in one of the rooms, sweeping or doing something like that, and looking across the hall. I could look across. We were in a room. There's a hallway, and then on the other side of the hallway, there was another door, so you can look into the other room from across the hall. I remember looking into the other room that was across the hall and seeing people talking and walking. I remember seeing this iridescent cloud. It was the most fascinating thing I've ever seen. It was like all different colors. It looked like a blob floating in the air. I wasn't even sure what I was looking at when it was moving across the door frame as I was looking at it across the hall. As soon as it moved across my frame of sight, I immediately, went across the hall into the other room, and there were other people in there, and they were talking. And I was like, "Did you just see that?" And they looked at me like, "See what? Well, what are you talking about?" I'm like, "You didn't see that thing floating in the air." They thought I was playing with them, I was just adamant, that I had seen this thing, and they were like, "Well, what did it look like?" And I gave the description and stuff. So they didn't know what to think, and I didn't know what to think. Nobody else saw anything. We continued our work. I remember going up to the third floor in Cook Castle. There were other people around. It wasn't like anybody was working alone there. We felt kind of safe in numbers. Everybody kind of felt spooked by being there, especially up on the third floor. On the third floor, it was kind of a big open space, from what I remember. And down at the other end of the room was an entryway into like a tower. That's why one of the reasons why it was called a castle, because it had this tower that went up to a fourth floor, a little area. I remember going up in the top of the tower and starting to clean up there. And it was the strangest experience, one of the strangest experiences of, I was completely alone, and I was in a space that's like about 12 feet across. It's a round room. and there's nothing up there. There's no one there, and just myself and cleaning, sweeping. It was like someone else was there with me, and the hairs are standing up on my arms and the back of my neck, and I kept looking over my shoulder like somebody was going to pop out. Just remember just being kind of freaked out at the energy of the intensity of that. And after a period of time, I was like, I just had enough. Like I couldn't take any more. I'm like, all right. So I leave, and I'm like, somebody else can go up there and finish up because I've had enough. We ended up cleaning the rest of the castle. We did that work. I think in one day we did that. That night, a group of us, about a handful of us, spent the night there on the island. So we didn't have to get in a boat and then go back to the mainland. We decided to sleep there. So we brought sleeping stuff to be able to stay there for several days. We got the okay we can work as much as we wanted. If we wanted to work 16 hours, we get paid for that. A lot of us, we just decided just to work and work and work. So we were working late into the evening in one of the other homes there. This particular house had a history to it. There's a big picture of a painting of the house, this particular house, that was painted from the lake. Like somebody was on a boat and did this painting of this house from the lake. It's nestled right on the edge of a cliff. And that was what the painting looked like of the house. It was a beautiful place. But this painting had a habit of turning upside down. And there was no logical reason how it could do that, because it was anchored by this cord that's behind the painting. In order to turn it upside down, you'd have to remove it from the wall, turn it upside down, and then reposition it. And when we came into the house the first time, the picture was upside down. So we put the picture right side up, did the cleaning in this place, and I was in one of the rooms, and we're the only people on the islands, on Gibraltar Island. There's no electricity elsewhere on the island. We're the only people that were left. And so when you go outside, it's pitch dark. And so I was cleaning in one of the rooms, and I was right next to the window. And as I was cleaning, I hear this knock on the window. And of course, I'm right next to the window. And I try to see outside, and of course, I can't see anything. And my boss, who's there, I said, hey, is there anybody else? Is everybody here who's supposed to be here? He's like, yeah, everybody's here. Like somebody just knocked on the window from outside. And he's like, you're kidding. There's nobody else is supposed to be here. So we all went outside, looked around with flashlights, and couldn't see anything. There was nobody else here. And we all kind of got creeped out over that. But when we were all outside, everybody came outside when we were looking around. When we went back in, the shower in the room that I was in was turned on. There's a little bathroom in that room. And so that was just another event that, like, okay, so who turned on the shower? Nobody had turned on the shower. It's like, okay, somebody's messing with us, somebody's here, somebody's playing practical jokes on us, Other people had strange things that happened to them while they were there. But the next day, once it got light out and everybody came back from the mainland, so there's a large group of us again, they're cleaning, went back into that house that we were cleaning that night. And the picture again was turned upside down. And I went into the room where I heard the knock on the window. The screen on the outside of the window was about 5 inches away from the window itself. The window was set into the house a little bit. So I went outside and looked at the screen, and it was painted shut. It was one of these old windows. There was no way to get to the window from the outside. There's no way to remove the screen. It was painted shut. There was no holes in the screen. The only way to knock on the window was from the inside. And that was right next to it when that had happened. And I showed my friend, my boss at the time, and that freaked him out. He was like, that's creepy, because they heard the knock. So my boss was working in what was called the cafeteria, and we were cleaning that as well. But down in the basement of the cafeteria, there were these 3 large freezers and one big walk-in freezer. And we did all the cleaning in there. And I had gone down, and he had finished cleaning the inside of one of the freezers, and everything was closed. The other freezers, the doors they were all closed, and we were having a dinner outside. I came down to get him, and we walked back up. He had left something down in the basement, and he asked me to go down and get it for him. So I went back down into the basement, and all the freezer doors were open, and we were the last people to leave. And I immediately turned around and went back up and was like, Mark, you gotta see this. We went back down there. It's like, what the heck? I was like, I didn't touch anything. All the doors were wide open. He's like, you didn't do that. I'm like, I didn't touch anything. So we shut all the doors again and grabbed what he needed and left. And we were all kind of just like, kind of freaked out. It's just one thing after another. We had a little bit left cleaning to do the next day. So we had one more night to spend there. It was the last night, and it was just I think 5 or 6 of us left on the island. And we had a few beers and stuff and had dinner. And there were a couple girls there that we liked, and that we were talking to and hanging out with. And so we started talking about all the spooky things that were happening and had happened on the island to other people and myself. And so my boss gives me a dare. I think he said, like, I'll give you an extra $100 on your paycheck if you go up to the tower in Cook Castle by yourself and come back down, but you have to go in by yourself. And it's at night, there's no electricity. As far as I remember, there was no electricity in the Cook Castle. And I was like, oh man, but it was $100. So I was like, ooh, I think I could do that. So it was myself and Mark, who was my boss, and 2 other girls that I don't remember who they were. We go to the back door of Cook Castle. We open up the door that made sure everything was locked. That was one of the conditions when we were done with the place, that it had to be locked up. So the castle had already been cleaned. So we opened up the back door, and it's like, okay, here's a lighter. There you go. Use that as a light and walk all the way up through the stairway and go up to the, we'll have a flashlight. He's basically saying, we'll follow you from outside with the flashlight. So just when you get up to the top of the tower, look out the window and we'll see you, and then you'll get your $100. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So as I'm walking down this long hallway, going from the back entrance into the main part of the castle, I hear Mark from behind me, John, I'm going to get you. Like trying to be scary and stuff. I'm like, aha, very funny. But as I go in further and further, it became very apparent that I felt like I definitely was not welcome there. It was pretty terrifying, and like walking in a place that that it's haunted by yourself with a lighter, was a thick lighter, afraid to see anything in your vision, in your peripheral vision or in front of you, so I just kind of just focused on my feet in front of me because I didn't want to see anything. I figured nothing's going to harm me. I'm just going to walk my way up and get up there, get the job done, and come back down. So I'm slowly making my way through, and I can't walk too fast because otherwise the light would flicker and sometimes would go out. So I had to take my time and walk up the staircase and get to the second floor and then again to the third floor. And the tension just felt so much heavier getting up to the third floor. And my nerves were just a wreck at that point. And as I'm going along, I could see the flashlight shining in through the windows from the outside because they're trying to see where I was. So I'm walking across the third floor and I come to the area where the tower is. It's a circular staircase that goes up to this little fourth floor area in the tower. And there's a window right there, right next to the entryway to go up to the spiral staircase. So there's a little bit of light coming through because you're shining the flashlight. And as I approached that doorway to go up that stairs, there was this darker than dark silhouette that was standing right in front of me. As soon as I saw this thing that was there in front of me, the little roller thing on the big lighter popped off of the lighter and it was just complete darkness. And at that point, I felt this, whatever it was that was standing there, I felt its presence, like just, I don't know how to explain it, but it was just like pure gloom and just terror came over me. And all I could do is I just kind of just shut down and I put my hand up on the window and just kind of slid down to a fetal position on the floor because I was so terrified and I could sense this thing was standing over me, this ghost, basically. I was just absolutely a mess. And I could hear them yelling and saying something outside. And after a while, they just they left outside. So I was there. I felt completely abandoned. And after about 5 minutes or so, 5 or 10 minutes of being there by myself, Mark and a couple other guys come in to Cook Castle and come up to the third floor. They're calling my name. And at that point, I'm kind of almost comatose. I can't really even call out. So they come up to the last place where they saw me. Here I was on basically curled up on the floor and they picked me up and come on, let's go. And they're like, you okay? And I was just just shaking, just absolutely just completely a mess. They walked me down the stairs and we went out the main door, which is a double door out the front door. And they brought me out and we sat down and laid down in the grass outside of the castle. I guess it was just adrenaline. My whole body was just shaking. It was hard for me to explain. It was hard for me to talk, but I was trying to explain to them that I saw this thing standing in the doorway. And they thought that I was playing a joke on them because as soon as they saw my hand slide down on the window, and shortly after that, the two main doors of the front door opened up from the inside. And they thought that I had come down the stairs and opened up the doors. And they were thinking that I was trying to mess with them. And so they went around and just around the castle a couple times trying to see if I was outside. And then finally the girls, basically told Mark, you got to go get a couple guys and go get John. So that's exactly what he did. And then when they brought me outside, it's look, I didn't open up those doors. These double doors, the only way you can open it up, there's a 2x4, at least at the time. In order to lock it, there was a 2x4 that was placed across these hinges on the doors. So you can't just open the doors. You have to remove this 2x4 and set it off to the side, and then you can open up the doors. And someone or something did that. And I was like, it wasn't me. I didn't move from that spot. And they saw how terrified I was. And I was just, for hours after that, I was just shaking. They saw the amount of fear that I had, and that just kind of made everybody else like, that's it. I'm done. We're all done with this place. The next day, everybody else came and we finished up cleaning and things. And that was the end of that experience on that island. Those are just a few of the major paranormal experiences I've had as a younger person, from my teen years to my childhood years. I've had a lot of other interesting things that have happened to me since as an adult, but that's a story for another time.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.